Today we see updates to two of Ibis's most popular trail bikes, the Ripmo and the Ripley. We're going to ride these two new bikes and see what we think about them, but before that we are going to sit down with Ibis's lead engineer, Colin Hughes, to discuss some of the design philosophies that went into these two new bikes, as well as some of the new features that you will find on them. After that, my coworker BK joins me and we discuss our initial ride impressions on these two brand new bikes from Ibis. So let's dive in. All right, before we get too far into the nitty-gritty on these two new bikes, let's first dive in and look at some of the details, starting with the brand new Ibis Ripmo. Similar to the previous generation Ripmos, we are running a 160mm fork up front, and then when we move to the rear suspension, they have bumped it up a few millimeters, going from 147mm to 150mm of DW link driven suspension in the rear. This particular bike right here is running a 29-inch front and rear tire, but you will notice there is a flip chip here in the rear triangle. That flip chip there will give you mixed wheel capabilities if you so desire to run 29 front, 27.5 rear. Ibis's small and medium bikes will be shipping with that 27.5 rear end, and the extra medium, large, and XL frames and completes will be coming set up full 29. Your ears didn't deceive you. I did say extra medium. That is a new size that is available in the lineup of Ibis bikes, and we are going to kind of dive into the details of that a little bit more when we chat with Colin, their lead engineer. But no, the Ibis has thought about really fitting a wider range of riders. So now with the small, medium, extra medium, large, and XL, they can fit riders in the range of 5'2" all the way up to 6'7" and get you a more proportionally sized, better feeling bike. So I could sit here and rattle off geo numbers for each different frame size, but it's probably not worth our time. I will link to the geometry charts on our website so you can deep dive into those numbers yourself if you so desire. One thing to really know about the geometry is Ibis is now doing size specific geometry on all of these bikes. And when I say size specific, I mean there are size specific seat tube angles, size specific chain stays, and size specific bottom bracket heights, as well as size specific suspension kinematics. Modern geometry you would expect to find on any do-it-all trail bike like this, but Ibis has really optimized the geometry on these bikes to more perfectly match each and every rider. So I know it's all about the angle of the dangle. You want to know what the head tube on the new Ripmo is, and it is 64.5 degrees. Not too steep, it's not too slack. It's kind of that perfect angle for your do-it-all trail bike. We've also got things like a 34.9 seat post. We've got threaded bottom brackets, which makes servicing super easy. Internal tubes for cable routing, a SRAM UDH rear end, so you can run SRAM transmission like we've got on here, but don't worry, if you want to run a mechanical drivetrain, you can in fact do that on the Ibis Ripmo, which I know is important to a lot of people. If you are looking at the rear end in the suspension zone, you will notice it looks awfully similar to the HD6, and that is the case. They are now utilizing this shorter little clevis here, which allows you coil compatibility with your favorite coil shocks. You can run those no problem. You're not going to be putting any weird torque on them and risking snapping that shaft on your favorite coil shocks. So that is a sweet bonus if you want to run coil. Bikes are nice and progressive, so it works on there. Finally, one of the biggest updates to the new bikes is this giant hole in the frame. Yes, that is right. They have added in-frame storage. As you can see, the doors are easy on, easy off. You can get in there, get your snacks, get your tools, get whatever you want in there. They do include two little baggies, which they co-designed with the team over at Cotopaxi Bags. One's great for holding tools, the other is great for holding your snacks. And who doesn't love a good acronym? Ibis is calling this new system STOW. Snacks, tools, or whatever. So I love that acronym. It is great. Awesome to see that in-frame storage added to these bikes. A lot of people want it, and Ibis has answered. The Ripmo is going to be available in two colors. We've got this kind of matte green that you're seeing here in front of me, and the other color is going to be a pretty sweet purple. Haven't seen it in person, but I've seen some photos. Looks pretty sweet. That is the Ripmo. Let's dive into what's going on with the Ripley. You might be looking at this bike going, that looks oddly similar to the Ripmo. And that is because the Ripley and the Ripmo, in fact, share the same front and rear triangles. What happens is they change to a different clevis, a shorter stroke shock, and a shorter travel fork, and you've got yourself a Ripley. Obviously, the Ripleys are going to come in some different colors, and you're going to have different graphics from the Ripmo, but it's using the same front and rear triangle. They did tell us that these clevises will be available aftermarket. So you could buy a Ripley and you could buy an aftermarket clevis and a longer stroke shock and a longer fork, do a little swap-a-roo in your garage, and have yourself a Ripmo. And then when you want a shorter travel bike, swap it all around again, have yourself a Ripley. That is pretty cool in my opinion. Because these two bikes do share front and rear triangles, you are gonna get all of the same features that I discussed on the Ripmo. You will still have the flip chips, but let's be honest, the person buying a Ripley is probably looking for a full 29er, and that's probably how most people are gonna run it. All of their bikes from small to extra large are shipping 29 if you purchase a Ripley instead of a Ripmo. Ripley will be available in two colors as well. You're gonna have kind of this glossy green color here that we see, and then we're also gonna see a matte blue colorway. Again, I'm not gonna run through all of the geo numbers, but I will link to them so you can click on that and deep dive into the geometry on the Ripley. Really sweet bikes, and excited for both of these. So that is our quick and dirty overview of these two bikes. Let's dive into my little Zoom call with Colin Hughes, the lead engineer at Ibis, to get some of the more intricate details on both of these two new bikes. Let's go. Sweet. So we'll just kind of dive right into it. So Colin, we chatted with you about a year ago about the HD6.
Yep.
So you are engineering manager at Ibis, correct?
Correct. Head of engineering. Been here for a good long while. Made quite a few bikes.
So Ripmo and Ripley, they are getting updated. I would probably call these probably two of your most successful bikes.
For sure.
Basically, every 2 years, it kind of seems like there's some updates that happen to those bikes. With the new ones, it seems like it's kind of a pretty big departure as far as like aesthetic and everything. How long were you kind of working on these projects? Like, when do you start?
We've been working on this one for about 2 years. We're kind of wrapping up the design of the HD6 and then transferred that platform over to making a new Ripmo and Ripley. About a year in design and about a year in manufacturing.
Wow, that's actually like a way quicker timeline than I would think.
Well, I mean, it was kind of a known platform with the HD6 first and basing it off of that. We did have to develop the whole storage door. That was like the big project. That was definitely treated with some respect. Its own separate project run in parallel, its own requirements and design goals and testing protocol, and just like it was its own thing. It wasn't just like, oh, we're going to put a door in this frame that we're developing. It was like, no, this is serious.
Yeah. That was definitely one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, was like definitely more than just cutting a hole in carbon, right? Like,
right. You know, we know how to make holes in carbon. I mean, put a giant hole in the side of an e-bike. So
yeah.
The carbon manufacturing wasn't the new part. It was the plastics design. Of course, it made plastics also, but never quite as complicated as this, as far as doing the soft material overmolding so that it has a nice seal and doesn't rattle, and then just the mechanical design of making the lever work with a nice detent so it stays closed. So there were definitely some new things we had to learn.
When you're starting a project on these new bikes, what were kind of like your goals to improve upon the old designs? Because like those bikes ripped, they were awesome bikes. But
yeah, well, it was just basically a chance to do a ground up refresh to modernize everything and add in all the features that people were looking for. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't really want to change bike. We just wanted to make it better in all the ways that people were asking. So obviously there was an aesthetic update to make it in line with the HD6 everybody loved, but also that upper link and clevis, we knew we had to get that in there to make it more progressive and more coil compatible. So it has a short clevis, and so you can run a coil without snapping the shaft. Obviously storage, and you know, everybody's putting storage doors in, but we didn't just start there by assuming we were going to do that. We actually tried to think of other ways to do it, because we were already making pork chops, and a lot of people really like those. The problem is that depending on what size frame you ride, everybody gets a very different amount of storage, and so by putting it in the down tube, everybody gets the same amount of storage. So we like that a lot better. And so yeah, we're going for an equitable amount of storage. And then the last thing we needed to update geometry because, you know, the Ripmo and Ripley was pretty ahead of their time when they came out. But yeah, things have changed since then. So we needed to make everything more size specific. You'll see size specific chainstays, seat angles, bottom bracket heights, a lot of new things for that bike to make it ride better for everybody.
Yeah, I was gonna say Cerise had kind of hit on that. That someone at Ibis had thrown around size specific everything.
Yeah, I came up with that.
Nice.
Yeah, it is. It was basically a whole look at every frame size and what that size rider needs to make their bike the best it can be for them, or a tailored approach, which without actually getting into a custom frame.
Like size specific suspension kinematics. So
Yeah.
is like a smaller bike going to be less progressive than a bigger bike just because the bike is smaller?
No, we don't want to assume that people weigh less just because they're smaller, or they don't ride as hard just because they're smaller. What it actually means is the pedaling kinematics of how the DW Link works is optimized for the size of each rider, mainly based off of the seat height. You know, the way DW Link works is all based off of the center of gravity of the rider, and that's, you know, a little bit in front of your belly button if you're sitting. And so that changes pretty evenly on each size bike as you go up, and we'd never done a specific kinematic for each seat height before. So we did that for the first time to make sure that all the sizes pedal as good as they possibly can.
And that plays into like, yeah, you've got different seat tube angles.
Yeah, the different seat tube angle things we've been doing for a while, that started on the XE because that bike, you know, really needed to pedal well in the sense it needed to put you in the position for maximum biometric efficiency. And that is not 78 degrees. And so we needed to start slacker and only go as steep as we needed to on the larger sizes to keep people in front of rear axle on climbs. You know, as you move the seat tube angles forward, you don't want to just make the bike too small. Otherwise, they're all going to have the same top tube length. And so we move the top tube length forward, and that pushes the reaches out. And so the reaches on the large and extra large frames look a little bit longer than what people are used to for those sizes. But if they look at the top tube lengths, they're actually the same as what they used to be. And so there's a bit of confusion about that on the HD6, the numbered sizing. We thought people would look at the geo chart a little bit more, but it turns out they only ever actually looked at the reach number, and they think the bikes are too big without riding them, which is a bummer. And so that's why we went back to lettered sizing and added the extra medium to be more clear about what the new size is. The new size was not the size 5. The new size was the size 3 to slot in between the medium and large because of the changes in reaches jumping by so much as the seat tube goes forward.
So I think I'm definitely one of those people that like kind of looks at reach numbers.
Right.
Yeah, it's just kind
of not the only thing you got to look at. You gotta look at top tube also. There's geometry is just more complicated than looking at one number. And then the last thing is the size specific chainstays, which everybody wants now. It's like a requirement. You have to have it. There's kind of two different styles of geometry going on. There's bikes where the seat tube angle does not change, and you need large jumps in chainstay length to make up for that. And there's bikes where the seat tube angle does change, and you don't need as big a jumps, because what the seat tube angle is doing is moving your center of gravity forward for you. And so it's a lot better at that than chainstay length is. So you got to change your chainstay length by 25 mils per size to make up for the change in reach per size. You only have to change your seat tube angle by 1 degree. And so we've done both. We've done a little bit of chainstay and a little bit of seat tube to kind of get a balance of center mass and, you know, acceptable chainstays so that your bike is still fun and playable everywhere. That make sense?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, hitting on that, you've added kind of this new size, extra medium. I was looking at the geo charts, kind of comparing it to the old one, and like that extra medium's kind of similar to the previous large.
Right. But if you sit on it, it's going to feel too small for you.
Okay, because that's what Cerise got us. She got us an extra medium. I'm like 6 foot, but I'm all legs. So like really short, you know.
Well, then that might feel all right.
Yeah, it does. It feels great.
Okay. Yeah, so if you're short torso and 6 foot, then that could work.
Yeah.
I'm 6'1", reasonably evenly proportioned, I think. I don't think I'm particularly long torso or legged. And the size 4 or the large is perfect for me.
I would definitely be interested. I'll have to, when we get more of those bikes here, ride the large and kind of see what I'm feeling. That extra medium feels great. I've been really stoked on it.
Okay.
You maybe want to kind of dive into the philosophy of the sizing and why you added that extra medium.
Yeah, it goes back to the size specific seat tube angles, creating large jumps and reach. When people are only looking at reach, they're like, oh, we skipped the large. And we didn't want people to think that. And so we made that extra medium so that there'd be finer steps and people could get their fit dialed in a little bit better. So you could have a guy like yourself who's 6 foot but short torso, find a frame size that's going to work. Whereas like on the XC, where there's only 4 sizes, that large is probably pretty long for you.
Yep. Sweet. You've got the XC, which is kind of your XC short travel bike.
Mhm.
You got the HD6, which is like the enduro bike. And I guess maybe Ripmo, Ripley, you're kind of like blurring lines. Like, I guess you'd call them a trail
Yeah,
bike.
they're both trail bikes. Now that we have the HD6, the Ripmo doesn't need to be a enduro race bike, and so it can kind of go back to being the long-legged trail bike or all-mountain bike that we started with, where we had 36 and the piggyback shock, but not the X2. You could save some weight that way, but it does have the same amount of travel, so it's still very capable. And the new geometry makes it very capable, but it'd be a little more efficient, a little more playful, fun to toss around.
Yeah.
But then on the Ripley side of things, the original Ripley was very light. It was 120 rear, 130 front. When we released that bike, we weren't sure which way people would take it. We built them up pretty light here as far as our spec. And then the first thing people did was put 140 forks on them and 4-piston brakes and meaty tires, and then asked for more suspension travel. Or rear suspension travel. And so we're like, okay, we can make that bike. We made it 130 in the rear, 140 fork, spec'd it appropriately, and just made the bike that everybody is building anyways.
Kind of blurs those lines, but
Right.
Obviously we're up here in the Pacific Northwest and we've got like steep trails, lots of route stuff. The Ripmo probably makes more sense, but I'd definitely say that Ripley probably fits most riders in most terrain.
I mean, the Ripmo's got some magic in that it doesn't usually feel like overkill.
Yeah.
There's a lot of all mountain bikes that are just a chore to pedal around, and they feel stuck to the ground, and you can't have any fun popping off lips or anything. Ripmo's not like that.
Yeah.
And that was definitely preserved in the new one, where you can have fun on almost any trail, but then it's still enduro capable. Yeah, the Ripley is similar, but not quite as much travel.
Yep. And then flip chips, obviously.
Yeah.
In both bikes, somebody who's riding a Ripmo is probably going to be more likely to MX the bike. Whereas
and so they come stock with 27.5 rear wheels on the small and medium Ripmo. And that was just because of dropper insertion. That rider wants to get their seat as low as possible, and maximizing that drop meant a smaller rack wheel for clearances. And that was important to that person, that size. So they just didn't want the butt buzz. So they now have that flip chip option.
So yeah, you're taller, you're about my same size. Do you find yourself sticking 29, or are you?
Yeah, that's right. I don't need mullet on a Ripmo. HD6, sure, but more travel on HD6.
Yep.
And I'm riding steeper stuff, but on a Ripmo, full 29.
Sweet.
But then Cerise, who's a medium, she was one who really pushed for that mullet capability on the medium.
Between the two bikes, Ripmo, Ripley, which one are you picking? Like, which one are you grabbing more often?
I've got mine set up Ripmo just because it does pedal really well. And so I can take it on any ride. Santa Cruz has got some very steep trails too. Yeah, I can go do all those trails on the Ripmo, whereas the Ripley, I can do them, but I'm going to have more fun on the Ripmo.
Sweet. Yeah, I've been riding the Ripmo so far. And our coworker BK has been riding the Ripley, and we're going to kind of swap today.
Oh, cool.
Kind of really excited to get out and try that.
I mean, the really special thing about the Ripley is how well it pedals.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, the new Ripley. And I think it is because of that size-specific kinematics, where pedaling platform is so dialed on that bike that, you can do some long rides, and it's still super capable.
Sweet. Well, appreciate you hopping on real quick, kind of chatting through some of the philosophy on the bike. Yeah, enjoy your holiday weekend. All right, so BK, I just chatted with the Ibis lead engineer, Colin Hughes, about kind of the details of these bikes. But you and I, over the last week or so, have been kind of swapping back and forth with these Ripmos and Ripleys, and we've actually gotten to ride them. So that's what people want to know. They want to know how these bikes actually ride. So what are kind of your initial impressions?
Yeah, main takeaways. Ripley is super lively. Bike that is going to be a little bit more rewarding climbing and just pumping through terrain. Maybe not something you're going to go do an enduro race on, but if you want a trail bike that's super lively and encourages you to hop and jump all over the place, that's kind of how that bike came across to me. And then the Ripmo is just firmly in that 150 all mountain category. Surprisingly climbs really well. I would say similar to the Ripley, just difference in tires, so you kind of have some of that drag there. But it gets up the hill well, and then when you're going down, it opens up a lot more than the Ripley does, and is definitely something that you could have as your everyday bike, but then also take it to the bike park every now and then, or do an enduro race on it.
Sweet. And you're currently you are riding like a 150, 160 bike. So that Ripmo, Probably felt pretty at home. How'd the Geo feel to you?
No issues there. I've ridden an S4 for people who are familiar with specialized sizing, and hopping on this extra medium felt right at home. You know, just little tweaks with like the cockpit and saddle height, but I felt like I was sitting right in the center of the bike where I wanted to be, both going uphill and downhill, so no complaints there.
Sweet, yeah, and I hit on that with Colin. They have added this extra medium size. So how tall are you?
I'm 5'10".
5'10", okay,
Yep.
so typically riding the S4 in the specialized bikes. I am 6 foot, and when I was talking to Colin, he was kind of like, oh, you might get on that extra medium and it might feel too small. But I'm a weird proportion. I'm all legs, shorter torso, and these extra mediums actually kind of fit me best. Yeah, I felt right at home on the extra medium. I would be interested to ride the large to kind of see what it feels like. But looking at Ibis's size chart, I am squarely like right at the end of that extra medium. So definitely felt pretty at home on this size. My initial impressions, kind of this Ripley, this thing is freaking awesome. You get it on like flowier trails, and both you and me were talking about how you could just generate speed with these things.
Yep, exactly. I mean, anything that's got rollers and berms, any of those pumpier, flatter trails, it just rewards you for pushing into the bike.
Yeah, and because they do share those same front and rear triangles, geometry is fairly similar. Colin was kind of talking about how in previous generations of the Ripley, people would overbuild them. You know, it used to come stock 125 rear end and a 130 fork, and the first thing people did was throw a 140 fork on it and kind of make it a burlier trail bike. And Ibis did a great job speccing this one. It's 130 rear end, 140 front. You're not going to have to add, you know, a 150 fork to the front of this bike or anything. If that's what you're after, the Ripmo is going to be a perfect option. Ripmo, is it playful? Is it lively? Like, you know?
Yeah, coming off of some other bikes that are in a similar category, I would say this one definitely does have a little bit more of that liveliness. Like, makes you want to kind of like hop up and jump over some routes you would otherwise just stay planted through on some other bikes. But then when you are hopping into, you know, a super techy area with rocks and roots and all that stuff, it soaks it up well enough. But it's just something about that DW link and what Ibis has done with these bikes that really just makes you want to like hop around and have fun on them. Yep. Whether you're on the Ripley or the Ripmo, I think this one just gives you a little bit more leeway for when you do find yourself in something super steep or techy to be able to get out of that.
Like when we were riding a rock roll on a trail called Devil's Cross, and they had recently taken out kind of like a nice smooth transition of wood built up there, and it's kind of an abrupt G out.
Yeah.
You were riding the Ripmo, looked super smooth. The Ripley, super confidence inspiring bike. I'm like, man, I can get on that rock roll no problem. But I did definitely hear a pretty solid bottom out on that fork when I got to the bottom. So just like if you are riding steeper terrain, things with bigger like G outs, that Ripmo probably going to be a better option for you.
Yeah, exactly. And going back to the Ripley, I would say it almost like gets you to that limit quickly.
Yeah.
Like you can find yourself getting a little bit over your head just because of how capable it is. So you have to remind yourself every now and then that it is not the Ripmo, even though it gets up to that speed just as quick.
Yeah, this thing, like, it just generates speed so well with that shorter rear end. I definitely think, like, if I was going to build up a Ripley, I would probably think about putting, like, a compliant handlebar on there, like the one-up bars or, like, the Race Face Eras, just because I was feeling it in my hands because I was riding, like, really rough terrain, and I wasn't afraid because long wheelbase, slacker head tube, you know, you can ride all that stuff. But shorter travel fork, you just really feel it in your hands. So kind of different strokes for different folks. If you want something just ultra peppy, easy to climb, Ripley's going to be your go-to, whereas Ripmo, if you're riding some chunder, but you do want to pedal all day, that's kind of the bike to do that on.
Exactly, yeah. That's how I'd categorize it. Being from the East Coast, that's the bike I'd take home. This is the bike I'd keep here, living in Bellingham.
Yep,
So,
makes total sense.
yeah.
Well, sweet. That's kind of our initial reviews of these bikes. Obviously, we are going to get out on them a lot more. We will have demos at the shop eventually. And, of course, you can purchase these bikes from fanaticbike.com. Swing in our retail store, shop online. We can help you build a custom one if that's what you want to do. And just want to say thanks for watching. So we'll see you later.
One and done. One and done.